Hello, friends, enemies, strangers, kind mothers, all sentient beings. Welcome to my channel, Buddhism for Happiness for All. That's at least what I expect to do, is to upload this session to that channel. So I'm trying to piece together a story about Tibet, its culture, its history, its religion, its importance. And I need the help of Tibetologists. Tibetologists, a person who studies Tibet, you could say. So I'm interested in the work of a particular Tibetologist right now, David L. Snellgrove, because I have an actual book by him. It's pretty thick. I wonder if I've got it here. Let's see if I can see it. If it's not here, no, that's not it. That's the inner science. Let's see. I don't see it right off. Oh, wait a minute. Could that be it? No, that's not it. It's a pretty thick book, so I don't think I have it here. I should have it here. It might be in one of these crates, you could call them. No, it wouldn't be there. Let's look over here. You think it's here? No, I don't think it's here. So it's one that I want to get. So, but I do have a PDF of one of his books it's co-authored with Hugh Richardson. It's called A Cultural History of Tibet. Now, why? Tell me why. Tell me why would it matter? So I wanted to let's see. A Cultural History of Tibet by David Snellgrove and Hugh Richardson is a comprehensive overview of Tibet's rich cultural heritage. The book explores Tibet's history, religion, and society, highlighting how these elements intertwine. It's valued for its detailed scholarship and insight into Tibetan life from ancient times to the 20th century. If you're delving into Tibetan culture, this book is a classic. Are you thinking of giving it a read? Yes, I am. Great choice. It's a fascinating dive into Tibet's cultural landscape. You'll find detailed accounts of Tibetan religion, politics, and daily life. It offers a window into Tibet's unique traditions and history. Enjoy the journey through Tibet's cultural tapestry. So, David Snellgrove was a prominent British Tibetologist. renowned for his deep exploration of Tibetan religion and culture. Born in 1920, he pursued Oriental studies at the University of London. Snellgrove's fieldwork in Tibet and surrounding regions led to groundbreaking studies and publications, significantly advancing Western understanding of Tibetan Buddhism. His meticulous research, translations, and teachings left an indelible mark on Tibetan studies. Perhaps his dedication and work ethic resonates with you, right? Let's see. Let's see. I'm also interested in his other book, Indo-Tibetan Buddhism. Yes, it's another key work. This book explores the transmission and evolution of Buddhist ideas and practices between India and Tibet. It's known for its thorough analysis and insight into the syncretic development of Buddhist traditions. Both books are crucial for anyone interested in the depth and complexity of Tibetan and Buddhist studies. So these books, A Cultural History of Tibet and Indo-Tibetan Buddhism, offers a deep dive together into spiritual and cultural fabric of Tibet. So you're in for an enlightening journey through the intricate world of Tibetan Buddhism and culture. Are you excited to get started? Yes. Okay, fantastic. Dive in and enjoy the wealth of knowledge. If you ever want to discuss what you're learning or have more questions, I'm here. Well, not me, but co-pilot, AI assistant. Okay, so Indo-Tibetan Buddhism by David Snellgrove is an influential work that examines the development of Buddhism as it moved from India to Tibet. The book explores how Tibetan Buddhism integrated with Indian Buddhist concepts with its own traditions. Snellgrove delves into the philosophical and ritualistic aspects, providing a comprehensive analysis of texts and practices. It is a must-read for those interested in the cross-cultural exchange between Indian and Tibetan Buddhism. It showcases how Tibetan Buddhism absorbed and transformed Indian Buddhist elements, creating a unique spiritual tradition. The book is a treasure trove for understanding the syncretism in Tibetan Buddhism. Okay. Let's see. Let me go over here and let's read from the preface. The preface to the 2003 edition. This is interesting. By the way, David L. Snellgrove lived from 1920 to 2016. And in 2003, he had an interview. And I was listening to the interview. It's on video. And maybe I could provide the link to the video. It's interesting. He's being asked about his life and how he got around to, get started and let's see. I wanted to know when he passed away. And so he passed away in 2016. Hey. Sorry. So, the preface to the 2003 edition of the book that I'm reading, the book is called A Cultural History of Tibet by David L. Snellgrove and Hugh Richardson. Interesting thing about Hugh Richardson is that he passed away around 2003, or maybe just before 2003, because a third edition of the book, A Cultural History of Tibet by David L. Snellgrove and Hugh Richardson, was put out in 2003. So there were two prior editions. I think the first one was in 1968, and then the second one was around 1995, and so this is the third one that I'm reading from. And I don't have the physical book. I have a PDF of the book, so I will read from it. So here's the preface to that book. It says, Preface to the 2003 edition, and it was written by David Snellgrove because his partner in crime, his partner in writing this book, had passed away. So he says in the preface, David Snellgrove says in the preface, well, I am glad to be able to offer this third edition of our book, which comes about thanks to a change of publisher. I lament at the same time the death of my co-author and old friend Hugh Richardson. So David Snellgrove is writing a preface to the book that he and his friend, his co-author Hugh Richardson, had written way back in 1968. And I guess they revised it in a second edition in 1995 or so, and then David Snellgrove came up with the third edition in 2003 because he got a new publisher to get the book out there again. So that shows you that the book was pretty important. It's pretty scholarly, yet I think regular people should be able to read it. Regular people. Like me. Okay, so so he's kind of sad that his friend passed away. He had been in contact with him since the early 1950s concerning our joint interest in Tibetan studies, as well as the welfare of Tibetan refugees. So that David Snellgrove and his partner in crime had a kind heart there towards Tibetan refugees. So attached to this preface is a copy of an obituary which I wrote for the Buddhist Studies Review. Okay, so we'll read that. But first, let's continue with this preface. So this edition, the 2003 edition, follows so soon upon the 1995 edition. So that was only 8 years ago, from 2003, when the bibliography was brought up to date. So that, I guess that was the purpose of the 1995 edition, was to get the bibliography correct and up to date. that no change. So he's saying here that there really wasn't much change from the 1995 edition to the present edition, the 2003 edition. See, no change in the contents of the book would yet seem to be necessary. We hope that its continuing availability to future readers will help to keep in public view the clear historical right of the Tibetan people to self-determination. At the most, any valid Chinese claim to authority over Tibet goes back only to the mid-18th century. So that would be around 1750, right? A far shorter period than any claim which the English maintained over Ireland, or that which the major European powers once claimed over colonized territories in any other part of the world. That would be North America, Latin America, etc. Australia, Canada, Central America, maybe African countries, Brazil, the Philippines, India. It is fair to note, however, that an earlier, far more tenuous Chinese claim through their one-time Mongol rulers has been made as far back as 1249. 1249. When the Mongol chieftain Godan Khan, governor of the Kansu province, appointed the Sakya Pandita as regent of Tibet. Subsequently, Kublai Khan, then governor of the Mongol-occupied territories, the northern western border areas of the Sung Empire, became the first Mongol emperor of China. Thus, the earlier Mongol suzerainty over Tibet has been claimed by this later association as a Tibetan one. As a Chinese one. So what is he saying? Do you understand it? He's saying that China has been claiming that Tibet was under its thumb as far back as 1249. But that's wrong. Around 1249, it was the Mongols who had Tibet under its thumb because they positioned a Mongol chieftain, Godan Khan, to be governor of Kansu province. No, he was already the governor, but what he did, so Godan Khan appointed the Sakya Pandita as regent of Tibet. So in another episode, I talked about Sakya Pandita, and you can look him up. So the Sakya Pandita, his name Sakya refers to him being of the Sakya lineage and family. He was related to Sakya family, right? And so this Sakya family single-handedly, I guess they were very rich and powerful. They were able to create their own lineage of Tibetan Buddhism. So maybe they may have been rich, but they were also very, very learned. And I believe the Sakya Pandita, this Sakya of 1249, was so educated in Buddhism that he well, for one thing, he became a monk. He was ordained a monk, and that was kind of a little bit different from the usual. The Sakyas before, they weren't becoming monks. They were just, I suppose they were scholars and dedicated Buddhists. So they had, you could say that they were lay, or in other words, non-celibate, or they were not ordained monks until this Sakya Pandita became an ordained monk. So, so at that time, there was no Geluk. There was no Geluk tradition because this was before Lama Tsongkhapa. Yesterday was Lama Tsongkhapa Day. That's it fell. If you study the Tibetan calendar and you calculate when to celebrate Lama Tsongkhapa Day, it's kind of strange, but it moves around because it's a lunar calendar. And so calculating the death day, when Lama Tsongkhapa passed away 600 some years ago, his death day ended up falling this time on December 25th. Because it's a lunar calendar, so it moves around. It can range from the middle of November to perhaps December 25th or so. So this is the first time that it has fallen on December 25th in a long time. Who knows how long? 50 years? I guess you'd have to calculate it and know how the Tibetan calendar, a lunar calendar, relates to the Western calendar, which would be an interesting topic and an interesting to understand it. I heard that the Tibetan calendar normally has 12 lunar months, but then ever so often, I guess it's every 12 years perhaps, they have to insert a month in there to adjust the calendar. Perhaps because each year is a set number of days, and it's a lot less than 365, a little bit less, so that then there's a gap, and eventually it gets accumulated so that you need to insert a whole month. Okay, so let me get back to reading the preface to the 2003 edition. So let me remind myself that this Chinese claim, it is fair to note, however, that an earlier, far more tenuous Chinese claim through their one-time Mongol rulers. So China was ruled by Mongols, so the Mongols had China under their thumb. So that as far back as 1249, when the Mongol chieftain Godan Khan, governor of the Kansu province, appointed the Sakya Pandita as a regent of Tibet. Subsequently, Kublai Khan, then governor of the Mongol-occupied territories in the southern and western border areas of the Sung Empire, became the first Mongol emperor of China. Thus, the earlier Mongol suzerainty over Tibet has been claimed by this later association as a Chinese one. Okay, in other words, Kublai Khan, it sounds like, took over a portion of China, thus making him the first emperor of China. And then, because of that, while being an emperor of China, he was also, you could say, an emperor of Tibet. Or at least they had Tibet under their control. So the Chinese claim that they had Tibet under their control, but no, it was under the control of the Mongol Empire. And this points out that it was happening as so under Kublai Khan, a Mongol who managed to occupy territories in the southern and western border areas of the Sung Empire. I don't know Chinese history, but I'd have to figure out how each dynasty and empire, what it covered, the dates and all that. I guess I could look it up, but for now, what I can say is that claim by the Chinese is designed to rewrite history. We can't let that happen. Okay. So on such terms, the Tibetan claim to independence in the modern world is surely indisputable. The Tibetans have a clear history of their own, testifying to their ambivalent relations with their neighbors, of whom the Chinese have certainly been in recent centuries the most important. They have a distinct language and literature of their own, going back at least to the 7th century. So they have a literature going back at least to the 7th century. Well, they do have an oral tradition that carries forward a literature, kind of like the Greeks do with the Odyssey and the Iliad and things like that. They have a huge piece of poetry that they memorize and they recite orally. It's the hugest epic in human history. The epic of the King Gesar. Gesar. Let me use another phone to find out something on the Epic of Gesar. Let's see. Man, I have to figure out how to. Let's see. Well, let's call it. Let's type in Epic of Gesar. Kind of the Epic of Gilgamesh. No, Epic of Gesar. So the Epic of King Gesar. So the Epic of King Gesar. Also spelled Kesar with a K. Or Gesar in the Mongolian context. Is an epic from Tibet and Central Asia. It originally developed between 200 or 300 BCE and about 600 CE. Following this, folk balladeers continued to pass on the story orally. This enriched the plot and embellished the language. The story reached its final form and height of popularity in the early 12th century. The epic relates the heroic deeds of the culture hero Gesar, the fearless lord of the legendary kingdom of Ling. It is recorded variously in poetry and prose through oral poetry performance, and is sung widely throughout Central Asia and South Asia. The classic version is found in central Tibet. Some 100 bards of this epic are still active today in the Gesar belt of China. There's a Gesar belt of China. Not just the Gesar belt of China, but Tibetan, Mongolian, Buryat, Balti, Ladakhi, and Mongol singers maintain the oral tradition, and the epic has attracted intense scholarly curiosity as one of the few oral epic traditions to survive as a performing art. Uyghur and Salar versions of the epic are also recorded among the Balti of Baltistan, the Burusho people of Hunza and Gilgit, and the Kalmyk and Ladakhi people in Nepal. And among various Altai, Turkic, and Tungus tribes. The first printed version was a Mongolian text published in Beijing in 1716. There is a very large body of versions, each with many variants, reputed by some to be the longest in the world. Although there is no one definite text, the Chinese compilation of its Tibetan version so far has filled some 120 volumes. It consists more than 1 million verses divided into 29 chapters. Western calculations speak of more than 50 different books edited so far in China, India, and Tibet. It has been proposed on the basis of phonetic similarities that the name Gesar reflects the Roman title Caesar, and that the intermediary for the transmission of this imperial title from Rome to Tibet may have been a Turkic language, since Kaiser entered Turkic through contact with the Byzantine Empire, where Caesar was an imperial title. The medium for this transmission may have been via Mongolian Kesar. The Mongols were allied with the Byzantines. Whoa, man. Okay, so there you have it. But I get distracted, so let's go back to see if we can finish the preface to the second edition. So, on such terms, it can be said that the Tibetans have, even though Tibetans, or the land of Tibet, is under the rule and under the thumb of the Chinese, the Maoists, the People's Republic of China, the Tibetans have the moral and historical authority to claim that they have their own history and their culture. So this book is a book about the cultural history of Tibet. And the authors assure us and will prove to us in this book that the Tibetan claim to independence in the modern world is surely indisputable. The Tibetans have a clear history of their own, testifying to their ambivalent relations with their neighbors, of whom the Chinese have certainly been, in recent centuries, the most important. Tibetans have a distinct language and literature of their own, going back at least to the 7th century, when they represented undeniably the major power in Central Asia. That distinct culture and their deeply revered religion differentiates them totally them from their Chinese neighbors. Well, it's been too soon since our 1995 edition to produce another supplement to our bibliography. Mention must surely be made of one important publication, which forms an indispensable work of reference for our whole book, namely the collected writings on Tibetan history and culture of Hugh Richardson, published by Serindia Publications, London, 1998, with the leading title High Peaks, Pure Earth. David Snellgrove. 1st of November, 2002. Okay. Now let's look at what David Snellgrove wrote, as in, you could say it was an obituary. Yes. There's a copy of the obituary which David Snellgrove wrote for the Buddhist Studies Review in 2001. So Hugh Richardson perhaps passed away a bit earlier than that. Earlier than what? Then okay, so it's a long obituary, it looks like. No, wait a minute. I got to the end of what I thought was the obituary, but no, it's the end of a preface. Oh, so maybe I passed the end of the obituary, but there's a preface to the first edition that ends. It was written in 1967, the preface, I guess, because it's got H.E. Richardson and D.L. Snellgrove as the authors of the preface. So that's the preface to the 1968 edition. It was actually written in 1967. The preface was. So it's a long preface. So, let's see if we can. Where is the preface? It's 6:15. Uh-oh. There's a problem here. Because it goes from page 9 to page 16. All of a sudden. So there's some pages missing. So what we get is incomplete. I may have to buy or find the book. But see, the obituary, I guess this is the obituary, but I don't know. I guess it's right there. Maybe it ends there. Let's see what I can get from it. If it's 2 pages, the obituary at least barely got cut off. So that's a problem. But here's how the obituary goes. The obituary, dedicated or in honor or in memory of Hugh Richardson. This obituary was written by David L. Snellgrove in around 2001, looks like. So Hugh Edward Richardson, well known as a leading authority on Tibetan history and traditional culture, and a staunch supporter of Tibetan independence, died after a painful illness at his home in St. Andrews in Scotland on the 3rd of December 2000. He was born in St. Andrews. So he died where he was born. On the 22nd of December, he died in the same month he was born, to 1905. So quite a bit older than David Snellgrove, well, at least 15 years older. Son of Colonel Hugh Richardson, and so must be one of the last of the old guard of the renowned Indian civil service, which came to an end with the granting of independence to India in Pakistan in 1947. So I guess his father was connected to India as one of the as a person who had a job in India given to him through the British government, I suppose. Well, he had it until the end of the British rule in 1947. He was educated at Trinity College, Glenalmond, and at Keble College, Oxford, where he read classics. At the age of 27, he joined the Indian Civil Service, thus following in the footsteps of his grandfather, who had served in India at the time of the Indian Mutiny. He served first as subdivisional officer in Tamluk, now in Bangladesh, and rapidly mastered Bengali in order to deal with the problems of the millions of Bengalis in his charge. In 1934, he joined the Indian Foreign Political Service, the important section of the ICS, which dealt with the native Indian princes in certain neighboring states, and was posted first to Baluchistan, now part of Pakistan. Here he met Sir Basil Gould, whom he had met earlier on a visit to Sikkim, where Gould was political officer at Gangtok, and thus responsible for India's relations with Tibet. When Gould made an official visit to Lhasa in 1936, he took Richardson with him and left him there as trade agent for the trading station in Yangtze on the way to Lhasa, and as head of the British mission to Lhasa. Thus he remained as British representative in Tibet, apart from brief periods of service elsewhere during the Second World War, namely on the NW frontier and in Chongqing, up to the time of Indian independence. He was then asked to stay on as their representative by the new Indian government. This led not only to protests from China, but also to his enforced departure when the Chinese invaded Tibet and occupied Lhasa in 1950. Wow. He was left by himself in Tibet. In all, Hugh Richardson spent 9 years in Lhasa. During this period, he made himself an expert in the copying, collecting, and editing of historical stone inscriptions on the early in the Lhasa area, dating mainly from the 8th and 9th centuries, and essential for establishing the early history of Tibet. Wow. These were published singly, mainly in the Journal of the Royal Asiatic Society, and finally as a whole collection, namely a corpus of early inscriptions, published by the same society in 1985. This work formed the scholarly basis of all his later academic work. One of his first diplomatic tasks was to obtain permission from the Tibetan government for a British expedition to attempt the climb of Everest from the Tibetan side in 1938. He likewise facilitated the visit to Lhasa of the renowned Indian professor Giuseppe Tucci. No, the renowned Italian professor Giuseppe Tucci, who had already carried out an expedition into western Tibet in the early 1930s. This resulted, among Tucci's many other works on Indo-Tibetan civilization, in the publication of his Indo-Tibetica in 4 volumes, 1932 to 41, dedicated to the British authorities in India, who had thus facilitated his travels. Richardson maintained a friendly scholarly relationship with Tucci up to the death of the latter in 1984. Better known, perhaps, is his kindly treatment of the 2 prisoners of war, Heinrich Harrer and Peter Aufschneider, who escaped from a prison camp in Dehradun and arrived in Lhasa in 1946. Although it was his duty to return them to confinement in India, he soon realized that they were no danger to Britain's wartime interests, and so allowed them to remain. But Hugh Richardson could also be stern and forbidding, as in the case of the Japanese agent Hisao Kimura, who made a journey from Kalimpong far into eastern Tibet in 1947. At the instigation of a British secret agency interested in learning something of Chinese intentions in Tibet. Arriving in Lhasa on his return journey in a desperate condition, he called at the British mission to ask for the means of getting back to Kalimpong, Richardson, who knew nothing of this secret journey, treated his story as a most unlikely one and refused assistance. See Japanese Agent in Tibet, as told by Scott Berry, Sir India, London, 1990. This little known mission, apart from providing an invaluable account of political conditions in Tibet prior to the Chinese invasion of 1950, indicates that the British in India were indeed concerned about the future of Tibet, but with the granting of independence to India, nothing came of this venture. Hugh Richardson later met Hisao Kimura on his visit to Tokyo in connection with the Rockefeller project mentioned below. So was able to excuse himself for his earlier forbidding attitude. He had simply not been informed in advance, perhaps serious omission of those responsible in India for Hisao Kimura's remarkable journey. Back in St. Andrews, in retirement in 1950, he married Hulda, the widow of Major General T.G. Rennie, thus acquiring a stepdaughter, Elizabeth, and a stepson, David. Elizabeth and her husband have done much to support his latter years, especially when his wife, Hulda, began to lose her memory, which caused him much distress. She died in 1995. Throughout his long retirement, Hugh devoted himself mainly to his gardening, to his golf, especially to his scholarly writings, also giving much of his time to younger scholars who sought his guidance and advice. His major publications, apart from a corpus of early inscriptions already mentioned above, are his Tibetan and its History, first published by OUP London, 1962. A Cultural History of Tibet, first published by Weidenfeld and Nicholson, London, 1968, later reprints by Shambhala, Boston. His Ceremonies in Lhasa Year, 1993, and a compendious work, High Peaks, Pure Earth, Collected Works on Tibetan History and Culture, edited devotedly by Michael Aris and published by Sir India in 1998. To these must be added his Tibetan Word Book, Calcutta, 1943, and Tibetan Language Records, etc., Calcutta, 1945, published jointly with Basil Gould, Gould, with the cooperation of Gergen Tarchin, then editor of the Tibet Mirror Press in Kalimpong, where these books were printed. Especially a number of important articles dealing with Tibetan history and civilization are Early Burial Grounds in Tibet and Tibetan Decorative Art in the 8th and 9th centuries. That's the title of that. It's in the Central Asiatic Journal, 8.2, The Hague, 1963. And The Dharma That Came Down from Heaven, that's in Buddhist Thought and Civilization Journal, I guess, California, 1977. And The Jokang Cathedral of Lhasa, that's in Ariane MacDonald, Essai sur l'art du Tibet, Paris, 1977. And Ministers of Tibetan Kingdom in the Tibet Journal, 2. L, 1977. And the Karmapa Sect, an historical note, JRAS, 1958 through 1959. etc. So this scholarly work was duly recognized by the honorary degree of D.Litt., Doctor of Letters, which was bestowed upon him by the University of St. Andrews in 1985 and by his election to the prestigious British Academy in 1986. However, Hugh Richardson is also known, especially by the 14th Dalai Lama and the many thousands of Tibetans who live in exile, for his staunch support for the independence of Tibet from the oppressive Chinese occupation, which has now lasted for 50 years. No, now it's 73 years. This set him openly at variance with the stance of the British government when Ireland with. Oh, and then something happened. That was page 9, and then it jumps to page 10. No, page 16. So there's page 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 missing. So 5 pages are missing, because then it goes into the preface of the 1968 edition, which goes something like this. Represent a preconceived scheme. In fact, we began rather differently, and it came almost of its own accord. It came almost of its own accord into this arrangement as we put our material together. As the earlier course of Tibetan civilization is so little known, comparison of the various parts of our work with similar periods in Western history may help to put the subject into a more familiar context for those who come to it for the first time. So this might be helpful to think of Tibetan history as running parallel to European history. In this way, here's how to think about it. So there's the Tibet of the early kings. That's going to be covered in part 1 of the book. It shows significant analogies with the Anglo-Saxon England and Western Europe under the Franks, the Lombards, the Visigoths, and other Germanic people during more or less the same period. That would be the 5th to the 9th centuries. We note the existence of the same kind of settled agricultural system, supported by cattle and sheep rearing, and much the same kind of established monarchic rule, despite the earlier occupation of parts of Europe by Romans, for which there is no parallel on the Tibetan side. Cultural and technological levels were probably comparable. In the sphere of religion, striking comparisons could be made. You could say that both in Western Europe and in Tibet, indigenous religious practices based on oral traditions remain strong, while a great universal religion would attempt to replace what was already there. So Christianity, on the one hand, that would be on the European side, and Buddhism on the other, that would be in Tibet, in the lands of Tibet. Was beginning, that would be the 7th century, was beginning to establish itself with the occasional support of interested local rulers, but largely through the efforts of small and determined monastic communities. So then the Tibet of the Middle Ages, that would be from the 10th to the 15th century, bears many analogies with our European Middle Ages. On both sides, the great universal religions triumphed, bringing in their train a whole new range of philosophical ideas, literary themes, arts and crafts, largely Greco-Roman for us and largely Indian for the Tibetans. By absorbing and reworking all this new material, both Western Europe and Tibet developed vigorous, colorful civilizations in which the established religions of Christianity and Buddhism often played a very worldly part. Despite the extraordinary sanctity of some of their devotees. It is only when we come to part 3 of this book that analogies break down. So the European Middle Ages ended with the Renaissance, leading to the exploration of new fields of learning, which soon began to threaten all the traditional assumptions upon which the earlier stages of our civilization were based. But as the old forms disintegrated, we were ever striving to rebuild them anew, so that although an entirely new kind of civilization came into existence, it still managed to keep some firm roots in the past. The Tibetans, on the other hand, in common with all other Oriental cultures, experienced no such renaissance, so it lacked fresh inspiration from forms. It lacked impression from stereotyped forms could mean that it lacked inspiration from new technologies. Mostly war technologies, maybe. The West advanced quickly in that area, while the East, in particular Tibetan or Central Asia, stayed behind. Why was that? Could it have been caused by their religion? They continued to live within the terms of what were now becoming stereotype forms. One by one, the great Oriental civilizations have been forced to come to terms with the resilient but forceful modern Western world. Tibet was almost the last country in Asia to have its doors forced open in the event by the British, and it is to its great tragedy that the perpetrators of the actual rape are humorless Chinese communists who show little interest in compromising with their own traditional cultural values, let alone with those of the Tibetans. So, yeah, well, I hope you found this interesting so far. I only got through a page out of maybe 3 or more pages in the preface to the 1968 edition. So, okay, so it is as it is. It is as it is? Uh, this is all you get. This is all you're getting from me because I'm getting tired and you're probably getting tired of me because an hour and 10 minutes is plenty. More than enough. So I hope to upload this as soon as possible to my channel, Buddhism for Happiness for All. The word "for" is the number 4. Instead of spelling it out as FOR, I replaced the FOR in the word "for" with the number 4. So it's Buddhism for Happiness for All. That's the name of the channel, and I'm sticking to it. And thank you. Thank you for your support. And don't forget to dedicate. I dedicate this to all sentient beings, to all my kind mothers. Thank you. Bye.